Deputy Mattie McGrath.
Minister, I too want to continue in the same vein today because the people out in the country are bewildered and becoming more bewildered by the hour. This situation where 8 times less people, with all your blunder and bluss and all your reports and examinations, 8 times fewer people this year will be exempted from the property tax. And I can only speak for South Tipperary, Minister, my own constituency. But I know that the unfinished estates, none of them have been completed. We didn't get enough money from the government, from the Minister, to put up the hoarding around them, to make them safe. So this is a total farce. I mean, when people read this morning, lose your health cover or your second car to sort out if you're in a negative equity and you want to do a deal with the bank. When people see that lenders are going to get tough. When people see what you and the Taoiseach Minister and Minister of Finance chaired a meeting last week about the situation in Cyprus, and we saw how uncaring we are.
Sorry,
when those people are standing up.
Which topic are we discussing now?
Sorry?
Which topic are we
I'm discussing the topic of the government's recklessness and uncaring, especially from the Labour government, for the people. 1913 was the lockout, great lockout. 2013 is going to be the kick-out. And that's what you're doing, putting people out of their homes, Minister. You should be ashamed of yourselves. I have a headline in the paper again this morning. A couple were locked into their home in Dublin, quite near the Minister himself, by, I suppose, probably people who came along, the heavies again, boarding them up with galvanised when they were in their home with a small child. What next, Minister? Is there no new load that the Labour Party are going to go to hang on with the mud guard? You now become the mud flat, and the mud is thickened for the Fine Gael government, Minister. I think it's an appalling situation, and you can wax lyrically. You can.
Sorry.
The question I have is, Minister. The question I have is, when are you going to stand up for the people you promised that you would stand up for? And no point in blaming everybody, developers and Genignite or other kind of stuff and everything else. The people out there in negative equity, the people who can't have to have a second car, Minister. I have to have a second car, anybody in my constituency.
Sorry, but your question.
My question is, when are you going to look after the ordinary people and not put them into penury, allow them to have their car to bring their kids to school, or do you want them all uneducated, Minister? This is unbelievable.
Thanks, Deputy. Minister.
Well, I feel like the people of South Tipperary after that. I too am bewildered. I mean, I'm very hurt. I'm very hurt, Deputy McGrath, that you should make such charges against me and against the government. The fact of the matter is, what we are trying to do is to protect ordinary people. What we are trying to do is put this country back on the road to economic recovery. And you know, there can't be any social services. There can't be nurses and teachers and fire brigade workers in post unless we get the economy right. And I don't think that it's fully understood how grave the situation was at the point that this government took over. The situation, we were on the edge of the abyss. That's how serious it was. And you referred to Cyprus. And what's playing out there at the moment. I mean, I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the television last night as the Fianna Fáil leader went out onto the plinth to talk about what the Eurogroup ought to have done in the case of Cyprus in respect of the proposal in respect of private bank accounts. He seems to have forgotten that he gave away the National Pension Reserve Fund when the Troika came in here. He gave away the National Pension Reserve Fund, people's future pensions, as a condition of the bailout. You know, there was no statutory measure accompanying that. So, you know, there's an awful lot of hypocrisy. There's an awful lot of hypocrisy associated with this, and you know, there is always an element of theatre about Parliament. And you know, I understand the posturing, but at the end of the day, we have to get the economy right. And what we're seeking to do is to spread the tax burden, spread it as equitably as we can. There are some colleagues behind me representing, on all sides of the House, in fact, representing Dublin constituencies, who would say that South Tipperary and other provincial constituencies get a better deal under the valuation system than happens in Dublin. But there had to be a valuation methodology settled on, and the one settled on is market value. And I believe that it is right that the efficacy of the collection system should not be in question, and that everybody makes a contribution who is able to make a contribution. There is a system of voluntary deferrals for those who can't do that, and there is a system of exemptions for those who accompanied the progress of the bill through the House. They know them in detail.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy McGrath.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, I'm just merely trying to explain. We all accept we have to try and get out of this abyss that we're in. We were told that the night that I voted for the bank guarantee. But how much worse would the abyss have been? That's why I mentioned Cyprus and the uncaring of your government now with the leadership of Europe for what's going on and being put on the people, robbing the private pensions, but of course their private savings. But of course you might mention Fianna Fáil robbing the pension fund, but you took out 0.6% of personal pensions of the ordinary people again, Minister. And when we see the bankers, the Richie Bouchers and many others, getting away all the time with what you promised you would do and what you didn't do, and it seems all the big people all the time are escaping, and the ordinary people who your party was founded in Clonmel, in my hometown, Minister, to represent those people, and you did ably for many years, many decades. You've abandoned them, you've left them behind you, and I don't see many of you canvassing up in County Meath because you're afraid to meet the people. But you'll have to meet the Minister because ordinary people cannot take any more. They cannot afford the health pensions, not to mind to say happen to get rid of them. They can't afford to get sick. The bus services for buses have tripled the cost.
I have a supplementary question.
My question is, when is the Minister going to act on the mandate that he got from the people of this country, with the promises he made to look after the ordinary people, to burn the bondholders, to stop the obscene wages to former politicians and former bankers, and severing bankers, as we find out this week? When is he going to live up to his reputation of being a hard man? I remember on the programme with former Minister Pat Carey, a gentleman, and you had all the answers that night, Minister. You have none since, and abject failure.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister.
Well, the fundamental answer I had that night, Deputy McGrath, was that what Deputy Pat Carey and his colleagues had done would put the subsequent government into a straitjacket in terms of its economic freedom to make decisions for this country, and so it has turned out. So it has turned out to be. And the fact of the matter is that from the bank guarantee in 2008 to 2011 election, 250,000 of our people were made unemployed. 250,000 of our people lost their jobs. Now that is the first priority of this government, is to put those 250,000 people back to work. That's the first priority. And in order to do that, you have to get the economy back into balance. You have to get the economy back into balance. That is the first challenge, and that is what we're working at. And there is no comparison between giving away the proceeds of the National Pension Reserve Fund and levying 0.6% as a contribution to the Jobs Initiative budget brought in by the Minister for Finance in the summer of 2011 that produced results in the tourism sector, in the hospitality sector and elsewhere, in circumstances where the same pension funds had been the recipients of enormously generous tax breaks and tax reliefs before that. So there is simply no comparison. And what we are trying to do is exactly what you claim to aspire to, Deputy, which is to look after the interests of the average citizen of this country, to give their sons and daughters an opportunity of working in their homeland again.
Thank you. That completes Leaders'